Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Mike Drop with me, Mike Turner, our Director of Development and Integration at Gap Relief, where I have the pleasure on our show of interviewing our service providers and partners here at Gap Relief. And today we have a special edition with our founder, one of our co-founders, Amy Butler, as well as one of our intensive leads, Brittany Turner, to talk through us about adoption. We've been tackling adoption from a handful of different angles here in National Adoption Month. And today we're going to, as we say at Gap Relief, seek to balance darkness with light and ask some of the harder questions, some of the harder stories in the adoption front, and how assumptions and people approaching it maybe in unhelpful ways can negatively impact adoptive families. And so, without further ado, Amy Butler, thank you for being on the show with us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Really appreciate it. So I know you've experienced difficult adoption, and you can feel free to share a little or a lot of that as we talk today, to whatever degree you feel comfortable. But knowing your story personally, is it safe to assume that you don't like it when people make assumptions about your story?
Mike, I love assumptions. I don't know why you would say that.
Oh, you just
I
love
assumptions. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Assume away.
Let me tell you what I think about your story, okay? Then, Amy?
Yes, I'm all about that.
Yeah,
you tell me.
All right, so from now on, we'll just hear from me and what I think about Amy's story. Obviously, we're kidding, but I've seen the movies. Adoptions always end, with a happy story, right?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, no, it's not true. No,
not true
at all.
at all.
Not at all, yeah.
In fact, so untrue, we decided that, let's have a specific segment today around hearing from adoptive moms, adoptive parents who have walked journeys that are particularly challenging.
Yes,
and kind of explore that and what that means for the overall kind of ecosystem of adoption, and especially for our viewers who are interacting with adoptive families and adoptive triads.
I love it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Amy, what would you like to tell us kind of to set the stage about your story and your journey with adoption?
Yeah, so I have 2 adoptive kids. I also have 2 biological children. And they're stair-step. They came in different age orders. And so even the way the on-ramping of the adoptive children into our home is different than like a biological family would have, like oldest, middle, youngest. So even birth order can be a thing, and that's definitely in my story. And so we have one adoptive kiddo that we got at birth, and so that an infant adoption, domestic, and it is different than my next adoption, which is from foster care as an older child. And even in that story, it's extra unique that we attempted to adopt her half-sister, but we were able to for various reasons. I'm sure we can get into that later. And so disruption from our home as far as when she was in foster care with us. So so our adoption journey has a little bit of different elements. So some families have one of those or have similar adoption themes in their home. Ours are very diverse.
Yeah, that sounds super diverse. So I'm going to model our encouragement of curiosity over assumption here.
Yeah.
I'm going to get curious with you. It sounds like you maybe have experienced both the kind of, I'll say, more prototypical story of adoption. We adopted, that child is still kind of with us, is growing their life in our home. You've also experienced a disruption, which...
Yes.
Define disruption for us.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So disruption is, we started with a plan. We read the files, and we felt led to agree to take on my current adoptive daughter and her older half-sister. And in that, we were taking a journey to try to see if this could work. And so our plan was to foster to adopt. And in the reality or in the experience of actually having them in our home, and evaluating safety levels, evaluating capacity, sustainability over years of raising children, we had to make a decision with our therapy team that we were going to have to disrupt, which means a child is disrupting from the home the plan that we had made, and getting them into a place where they will be safe. And so so disruption's a great word for it because it's a boom. It's like, here we are in this plan, and it's a boom to all. It's a boom to the family who disrupts. It's a boom to the child. It's a boom to the therapy team. Like it's painful and yet necessary, like a necessary disruption for the sake of all.
That makes so much sense. So as I think about your experience in light of kind of what we're talking here today, you've had, as we just said, kind of experiences on maybe like both sides of the spectrum, or so to speak. That kind of fails to capture the point. But I would imagine that your story opens you guys up to a lot of different people's opinions and
we're not pretty.
Assumptions,
we're not
maybe,
pretty, Mike.
even about. Whereas you walked through every single day and got all the data points and are a very, accomplished and knowledgeable therapist who deeply understands human psychology, and you walked all of that out. Did you experience people making assumptions about your story that they didn't have the right to make?
Absolutely. I think if I touch on each of my unique situations, there were some assumptions about each. So the one we got as an infant, a lot of times there can be assumptions that, oh, it's a baby, so attachment's going to be a certain way, just like biological children. And oh, infants are easier, and that's more safe and secure than if you adopt an older child. And in my story, because of the special needs that particular child has, adopting him as an infant didn't protect or shield from all the hard that would come along in that adoption. Our adoptions are also biracial. And so we, as a family, walk the line of two different cultures coming together into a family system, which is also, there's a lot of nuances to that are hard to appreciate, or in assumptions about how we operate in our differences. And so, and then in another adoption with the child who is older when we got her, assumptions around that being, that the way we operate to meet the needs of our children have to look a certain way. So parenting looks different. So sometimes it can look mean, when you have to hold a really strong boundary with the kid that has a lot of trauma. It can be misunderstood. Assumptions that parenting looks the same, or the needs of the child at school look the same as mainstream kids, or the way we have to think and operate as a family and what meets our needs is not going to look like a stereotypical family. And so assumptions are everywhere, like probably assumptions that aren't said, and then maybe some that are said maybe in some of the questions people ask or things like that.
So I imagine, I'll assume, I'm just kidding, but I'm getting curious, and we are trying to push toward, some of the more challenging aspects of all of this. Is I know that there is just some honest curiosity out there.
Yeah.
And there's people that are going to make some assumptions that are not malicious, no intent to cause harm, and all the way up to maybe some people who think they know everything and actually do cause harm with the things they say or the assumptions they make. Can you tell us about some of the negative impacts that you have seen, unmerited assumptions being made around you and your family, the negative impact it's had on you guys?
Yeah. So, I want people to be curious. That actually feels good. And so I wouldn't want anybody to feel anxious about being curious, because I think that's where learning happens. And I think adoptive families take on kind of an education role in our community, because people need to be told what the terrain is like. And so if they don't know, they don't know. Yeah. And so curious questions feel good. Where it would maybe not feel good is if it's in front of my child in a way that makes them feel shame, or like they're obviously not belonging, or things like that. But when it's to me, I'm a pretty open person, because curiosity is working through assumptions. Like you're trying to work through the assumptions. Good. And so, but as far as like impact to my family, we have had to operate in a way that just makes sense to us, and really try to block out what other people's thoughts or feelings or maps are in the world, because I just know that they don't get it. So like you said, Amy, you had all these data points. You track this like a trauma therapist. And so you disrupted a child from your home. Yes, I did. And it was the right thing to do. But the people around me, if I was basing that decision off of what the people around me would have preferred, we would have never disrupted. But they weren't walking what the consequence of not disrupting would have done to the humans in my home. And so it's not pretty. It's kind of a war zone a little bit, and you don't get to make decisions that are pretty in those places.
That's such great insight. And if I capture that one, to me, it's nobody knows the story like the family that's walking the story.
Yes.
And just admit that to yourself and leave your assumptions at the door.
Yes.
You mentioned a little bit, I'm going to ask one final question before we wrap here is, hey, if you are curious, I love that. Come toward me. Hey, maybe don't ask, those kinds of questions in front of my kid or this or that. What else would you hand? We'll give a real life scenario or two, somebody who does know somebody who's considering disruption. And man, that sounds hard. That sounds scary. That sounds painful, sad. Or just purely, my friends just adopted a kid and I can kind of tell they're having a hard time. How can I approach them in a way that upholds that curiosity, puts the assumptions at the door, and is honoring and encouraging to them?
I love that question because I believe that most people haven't seen just the messiness of that terrain. Like, most people don't want to imagine a world where a child disrupts from a family and has to go somewhere else for the safety of all involved. Like, to accept that sometimes is a reality, I think is huge in that scene. And so to be a safe support person, to be a safe friend to someone who's really struggling in adoption is to hold space that the family's going to walk it the best they can, and that if a disruption is necessary, that you're making space as a support person, that is the terrain sometimes. And it's full of grief. Nobody likes it. Nobody's like, yay, disruption. But to be brave, to feel even your own grief, your own feelings, so that you don't put that on your friends, because they're already dealing with a lot. Like, they're going to have a lot of grief. So while they might express relief, a little bit of relief in a disruption, they've already walked through the grief before they even got to that place. And so just being understanding, to not villainize or to judge humans that have to get into these places, because adoption is messy. These are people that say yes to hard things, and sometimes the hard things are not sustainable.
That's really good wisdom. And one last feel like a nugget you gave us there that is so good is the idea that if you are going to come in and you want to be a support to somebody walking a journey like this one, you need to recognize that to play that role is to be willing to step into the tension, to step into the challenge of balancing darkness with light, to step into the grief and not come and just pile on with your own stuff, but be willing to lay down and support. And honestly, just taking stock of yourself, are you there? Can you actually do that? Or are you going to do more harm than good by trying to insert yourself into a challenging story? I think that's one of the biggest ones
that you just said.
Yeah. It's good. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. I know this is one of our heavier episodes here on Mic Drop.
I'm here for the dark. I'm here for
it. I love the work we do here at Gap Relief, and National Adoption Month. We've been talking a lot about it, but at Gap we spend a lot of time talking and working with adoptive families, adoptees, birth families, the whole kind of adoption triad. So if you have questions or you want to continue the conversation, if something Amy said, you're like, I just want to talk to her, you can reach out to us on our website, gaprelief.com, or find us on social media. We would love to continue the conversation. So thanks for tuning in today, and have a great week.